The sight was unbearable. A 5-year-old girl barefoot in the rain, sitting on the curb outside her own mansion, abandoned, clutching a one-eyed teddy bear like it was her last shield against the world. That child was Lara Crest, a daughter of millionaire real estate mogul Nolan Crest. And the man who stumbled upon this scene wasn't a stranger passing by. It was her father, arriving home one day early from a business trip. The moment Nolan stepped out of the taxi in Coral Gables, Florida, expecting warmth, he was greeted instead by silence. And then the faintest voice breaking the storm. "Daddy, please, don't let her hurt me again." Hi, I'm John Parker, and today's story will touch your heart. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give your like, it means so much to me, and leave in the comments which city or country you are listening from. Nolan froze in disbelief. Lara's yellow sundress was torn at the hem, mud smeared across her knees, her hair tangled in wet strands plastered to her pale face. She looked at him as though she wasn't sure if he was real. For a heartbeat, she didn't even call him Daddy. Her lips trembled, her tiny fists clenched the teddy tighter, and then, suddenly, she bolted toward him. "Daddy, you came back!" When her frail body collapsed into his arms, Nolan felt the bones beneath her skin. She smelled of rain, dirt, and something else, neglect. He wrapped his jacket around her shoulders, trying to shield her from the drizzle, though the storm outside could never match the storm now building inside him. "Lara, why are you out here?" "Where is Sloane?" he asked, naming his 28-year-old second wife, the woman who was supposed to watch over his daughter during his travels. Lara buried her face in his chest, trembling violently. She said, "You died in the plane. She said you'd never come back for me." Nolan's heart pounded against his ribs. He turned to the mansion, every curtain drawn tight, yet faint bass music thudded from within, mingled with bursts of laughter and the clinking of glasses. He tightened his grip on Lara. "How long have you been outside?" His voice shook despite his effort to remain calm. "Since yesterday morning," Lara whispered. "Aunt Sloane told me to stay in the yard. But when it got dark, I got scared. So I came here to wait." The words cut like knives. 24 hours. A child abandoned on the wet pavement while inside the house, his house, there was celebration. Lara's bare feet were purple with cold, covered in small cuts. Bruises, shaped like fingerprints, ringed her thin arms. Nolan carried her across the stone walkway and slid the key into the massive oak door. As it creaked open, the stench hit him first. Stale perfume, spilled liquor, smoke. The once immaculate living room was wrecked. Crystal flutes left half-filled. Empty champagne bottles tipped across his glass coffee table. A silk tie, clearly not his, draped over the arm of the sofa. Designer shoes scattered like abandoned masks after a party. Lara whimpered, shrinking against him. "The uncles are upstairs with Aunt Sloane." They laugh. They make scary noises. Each word deepened Nolan's dread. He ascended the marble staircase slowly, Lara pressed against his chest. With every step, the sounds grew clearer, muffled voices, male laughter, and something else, groans that twisted his stomach into knots. At the bedroom door, slightly ajar, Nolan froze. Through the crack he saw movement. A woman's laugh, his wife's laugh, rose above the others, syrupy and shameless, Lara's voice almost a plea. "Daddy, can I sleep in my little room now?" "I'm cold." Nolan turned away, rage simmering like a furnace. He carried her down the hall, past the door that should have been sacred, into Lara's room. What he found there nearly brought him to his knees. The bed was unmade, sheets stained. Plates of rotting food lay on the dresser. The smell of mildew and neglect filled the air. "Sweetheart, when was the last time you had a bath?" "A proper meal." Lara counted on her fingers, her tiny lips moving. Finally she whispered, 5 days maybe? "Aunt Sloane says dirty kids don't belong in the house when important people visit." The world tilted. 5 days. His daughter had been treated like an intruder inside her own home. Nolan kissed her damp forehead, whispering, "You'll never be left alone again." "I promise." But promises were only the beginning. Nolan had no idea just how deep Sloane's betrayal went, or that this night would unravel secrets so dark they would ruin reputations across the city. The introduction was over. The war for Lara's soul and for truth was about to begin, and in the kitchen, footsteps were already approaching. The oak door sighed shut behind them, sealing out the rain, but not the chill. Nolan set the millionaire's dignity aside and moved like a father first. Towel, dry shirt from the hall closet, a blanket from the den. He wrapped Lara, rubbed warmth into her tiny hands, then carried her toward the kitchen where the house had always smelled of garlic, cilantro, and warm bread when the nanny was around. Tonight it smelled like stale champagne. Marble counters were sticky with rings of liquor. A crystal flute lay cracked near a puddle that glowed amber under the pendant lights. On the island, lipstick-stained napkins, a cufflink that wasn't his, a playing card half soaked by melted ice. Family secrets didn't bother to hide. They sprawled across his home like they paid the mortgage. "Daddy, I'm hungry," Lara whispered. He opened the Sub-Zero, beer, tonic, a lonely jar of capers, takeout that had aged into science. Nolan cursed under his breath, found shelf-stable milk in the pantry, warmed it on the gas range, and set a saucepan of water to boil. From a hurricane kit, he pulled emergency oatmeal and a sleeve of crackers, Miami habit. While the oatmeal thickened, he peeled a soft mango from a bowl that shouldn't have been left by the sink. The fruit sweet and bruised like the kid before him. Lara devoured the first spoonful, then slowed, unsure if she was allowed to like it. "Is this for me?" "For you," he said. "And more is coming." Footsteps creaked down the back stairs, male voices, the easy arrogance of guests who believed the house was theirs. Nolan pivoted, instinctively placing his body between the child and the doorway. The first man was older, belly straining a borrowed robe, Nolan's robe. The second was younger, gym-cut, bare-chested, a gold chain winking at his collarbone. Both froze when they saw the owner of the mansion. Rain ticked at the windows. The younger one grabbed for his dress shirt draped over a chair. "Whoa, hey," the older man stammered, accent from somewhere up north. "She didn't say her husband was back." "She didn't say she had a husband," the younger corrected, already backing toward the hallway. You thought wrong," Nolan said, voice low enough to skip across the tile. "Out!" The older man raised his hands. "We paid. She said this was part of the experience. The mansion, the view." Nolan's jaw worked, one heartbeat from breaking. Lara flinched at his silence. He exhaled, pointed to the service door. "Leave your explanations outside." They vanished, the door thudded, and the house breathed for the first time. It didn't last. Sloane Vance drifted in like a late-night commercial, hair tousled into calculated chaos, satin robe knotted as if modesty had just occurred to her. She blinked at the millionaire she married, at the child she'd left in the rain, and arranged her face into sympathy. "Nolan, you startled me. You weren't due until tomorrow." "I moved my flight," he said. "Seems like I wasn't the only thing moving in this house." Sloane's gaze flicked to Lara, then to the oatmeal, steaming on the stove. "Sweetheart, you should be in your room." "Adults are talking. She stays," Nolan said, gentler to his daughter. "Finish, honey." Sloane let a brittle laugh spill. "Let's not be dramatic." Friends came over. "You travel." "I get lonely." "Lonely?" He nodded toward the cufflink, the lipstick napkin, the broken flute. "Looks crowded." Her charm tightened. "You're always in New York, Houston, deal, deal, deal. You forget there's a woman here." "A woman?" He set the bowl down, lifted Lara to the breakfast nook, tucked the blanket tighter. "There's a child here." Sloane's mask slipped, just a second, but enough. "She's not mine, Nolan. I didn't sign up to be a live-in nanny." The word hung there like a dare. Lara's spoon trembled. "I was good," she blurted softly, terrified she'd broken a rule. "I stayed quiet like Aunt Sloane told me." Nolan's eyes cooled to something winter-hard. "We're done discussing this in metaphors." The landline rang, old-fashioned and urgent. He snatched it up. "Mr. Crest? This is Rosa Delgado." The voice steadied him instantly. The maid, the nanny, the housekeeper, who'd kept this place woven together with grace and cafecito. "Neighbors said you were back early. I need to speak with you about Lara." Sloane went white. "You don't need to." "I do," Nolan said into the phone. "Rosa, are you safe?" "I'm 2 streets over with my sister." Rosa replied. "I have notes, photos, recordings. I didn't want to believe, but I wrote everything in case you needed light in the dark." Light in the dark. It sounded like Miami after a hurricane, when neighbors shared generators and stories at the curb. It sounded like hope. "Please come," Nolan said. "Now." He hung up. Sloane's voice sharpened. "You're not dragging the help into our marriage." "Our marriage." He smiled without humor. "You invited half of Coral Gables into our bed." "She's lying," Sloane snapped. "She was always jealous. She hated that I updated this house, that I raised the standard." "Standard?" He lifted the cracked flute, its lip jagged. "What standard is this?" Lara whispered, as if confessing to a priest. "When Miss Rosa was here, she made me cinnamon toast and cafecito milk, and she said kids belong inside during thunderstorms." Sloane's pupils pinpricked. Rosa coddled her. "It's why she cries. Children cry when they're cold," Nolan said. "And when they're scared," the doorbell chimed. On the front step stood Rosa Delgado in a rain poncho, a reusable grocery bag slung over her shoulder, the nanny who had taught Lara to say please in English and gracias in Spanish. She stepped inside, hugged Lara with a warmth that made the kitchen remember itself. "Nena," Rosa murmured, smoothing wet hair. "You're safe." Sloane folded her arms. "You don't work here anymore." Rosa met her eyes, unafraid. "I worked for this child." From the bag came a battered spiral notebook, an old phone with a cracked screen, a manila folder of time-stamped photos. Lara under the mango tree during a storm. Lara drinking hose water. Lara asleep on cool tile, clutching the one-eyed bear. Dates, times, license plates, deliveries, music nights. A map of betrayal copied in neat handwriting. Nolan didn't blink. "Play me what you recorded." Rosa hesitated. Glanced at Lara. "Some words are heavy," he nodded. Moved his daughter to the hallway with a coloring book fetched from the entry credenza, the one Rosa herself had filled with crayons months ago. "Draw me our garden, honey." "I'll be right here." Back in the kitchen, Rosa tapped the recorder. Her voice poured out. Sloane's, and the sweetness was gone. "Stop spoiling her, Rosa. If she cries when I have guests, I swear I'll put her outside. Better yet, find me a clinic that takes kids who act out." Nolan's grip tightened on the island edge. Rosa pressed another clip. A man's laugh. "Price numbers." "The mansion sells the fantasy." A third clip, colder, calculated. "Tell Nolan she's dramatic. He won't question it." "He never does." Without a word, Nolan set his cell on the counter, opened the voice memo app, and tapped record. The millionaire had walked into his own home. Now he would walk the truth out of it. "Sloane," he said, voice low, controlled, judicial. "We're going to talk about your guests, names, times, and why a child slept on tile while music played. Upstairs." Sloane's chin lifted like a defendant's. "You can't prove anything, Rosa." Slid the manila folder closer. "We can." And then the doorbell rang again. Once, twice, urgent, like the city itself had come to listen. The second doorbell chime echoed through the mansion like a judge's gavel. Nolan's jaw tightened. Lara peeked from the hallway, crayon in hand, startled by the sound. He reassured her with a nod, then walked to the entry. Outside, under the drizzle, stood Carmen Reyes, the elderly neighbor from 2 houses down, wrapped in a floral raincoat. She clutched a Tupperware container like a peace offering. "I saw lights," Carmen said softly, eyes shifting toward the mansion as if it had grown fangs. Is she all right? I used to see her waiting in the yard. I'd leave sandwiches by the gate." Her voice cracked. She was too polite to ask, but too hungry to refuse. Nolan's breath caught. The betrayal wasn't just inside, it had spilled into the street, seen by neighbors, whispered by passers-by. He ushered Carmen in, placed the Tupperware on the counter, and guided Lara into her arms. Lara clung to the older woman with a familiarity that stabbed his heart. Sloane's eyes flashed. "This is ridiculous. Strays bringing food to a child who already has everything? Nolan, you can't let this circus continue." But Rosa, steady as a lighthouse, spoke firmly. "It continues because she made it so. A mansion can be a prison if the wrong person holds the key." Carmen nodded, lips trembling. I couldn't sleep at night knowing she was out there. Once I saw lightning strike so close to the jacaranda tree, Lara was huddled under it, drenched. I begged Sloane to let her in. She just smiled and shut the door. Lara buried her face in Carmen's shoulder. It was cold, Daddy, but I pretended the thunder was drums like in the parades. Nolan's chest swelled with grief and pride. His daughter, trying to make a nightmare sound like a festival. He turned back to Sloane, whose composure was beginning to unravel. We're done pretending this is about loneliness or jealousy. This is about cruelty, Sloane sneered. You're always gone, Nolan, always chasing another skyscraper, another deal. What did you expect? That I'd sit here and knit sweaters with the maid while you conquered the skyline? The words struck, but they didn't land where she aimed. Nolan remembered the late nights in Houston boardrooms, the conferences in Manhattan, the way he convinced himself that buying a bigger mansion equaled providing love. Maybe he was guilty of absence, but he wasn't guilty of betrayal. Rosa slid another photo across the counter. It showed Lara crouched near the pool, holding her stomach as if hunger were a physical stone. In the blurred background, men in suits carried bottles inside. This was 3 weeks ago, Rosa explained. That night she cried for hours. Sloane told me if I comforted her again I'd regret it, Carmen gasped. Lara whimpered. Nolan felt the weight of 100 board meetings collapse into dust. Sloane, he said, his voice no longer low but rising. How many nights? How many strangers in my home? How many times did you push my daughter into the dark so you could light a candle for your lies? Her silence was an admission. The marble floor seemed to tilt under the weight of truth. Nolan took Lara's small hand, guiding her toward the grand staircase once more. Show me, he whispered. Show me where you had to stay. The girl pointed to the patio door, its lock still damp from rain. She led him out, bare feet leaving tiny prints on the tile. The storm had calmed, leaving puddles that reflected the yellow glow of the mansion's lights. Under the jacaranda tree, she stopped. This is where I waited for you, she murmured. I counted cars. When the gate opened, I thought maybe it was you. But it was always men. Nolan bent, lifted her into his arms, and pressed his forehead against hers. Never again, he vowed. No more waiting. No more lies. As they stepped back inside, Rosa and Carmen exchanged looks, one of sorrow, the other of resolve. The kitchen now held not just evidence, but witnesses. Sloane lingered at the foot of the stairs, robe clutched like armor. You're turning this into a trial, she spat. Nolan's gaze was steady. No, Sloane. The trial began the moment you left a child outside in the storm, and as Lara leaned against his shoulder, eyelids fluttering from exhaustion, Nolan realized the bedroom door upstairs wasn't the only one with secrets. Rosa had hinted at something more, something darker. The house had become a stage of betrayal, but the next act would reveal the depth of Sloane's game and the names of the men who played along. The night wasn't over. It was only tightening its grip, and behind one of those locked doors lay a truth capable of burning not just a marriage, but half the city's reputation, and Nolan was ready to turn the key. Nolan's footsteps echoed on the marble as he climbed again, this time not to retreat, but to confront. Each stare felt like a verdict, each breath a countdown to exposure. Lara, now asleep against Carmen's shoulder in the living room, was safe. Rosa followed Nolan at a distance, her bag of evidence clutched tightly, while Sloane slinked behind them, muttering protests that sounded less like excuses and more like the shrill cries of someone cornered. At the top of the stairs, the door was still ajar. The music had gone silent, but the scent of champagne and sweat seeped through like a wound that refused to close. Nolan pushed the door open with a deliberate hand. The sight inside would burn into his memory. The master bedroom, his sanctuary, looked like a hotel suite after a bachelor party. Sheets crumpled, pillows tossed, expensive cologne mixed with the acrid sting of smoke. On the dresser lay a stack of crisp bills, half hidden under an empty bottle of Dom Perignon. Next to it, a small lockbox, lid cracked open, wads of cash spilling like confessions. Nolan stepped inside, each detail hammering him harder. A satin slip that wasn't his wife's size hung from the chandelier. A cufflink engraved with initials, PD. He picked it up, recognition sparking. Pierce Donnelly, councilman, family values politician. He turned, holding it like evidence in a courtroom. So this is your idea of lonely, Sloan? Charging city leaders by the hour in my bed? Sloane's face drained of color. You don't understand. They paid for the illusion. It wasn't about me. Rosa snapped. Tell that to the little girl you left counting raindrops outside while you sold illusions upstairs. Sloane's mask slipped, revealing the venom beneath. That child isn't my responsibility. I married a man, not a brat with wide eyes and sticky hands. Nolan's rage flared, but he held it, turning fury into ice. She's 5 years old. She's my blood, and she will never forgive what you've done. Neither will I. Then Rosa stepped forward. Mr. Crest, there's more. I didn't show you everything downstairs. You need to see this. From her bag, she produced a small recorder, thumb trembling as she pressed play. A voice filled the room. Sloane's voice. Unmistakable, dripping with contempt. He thinks he's untouchable. But while Nolan flies across the country, I host the city's best in his own house. If the brat gets in the way, I'll have her sent off. Easy solution. Money talks louder than a child's tears. Nolan's breath caught, his fists curling. Sent off? To where? Sloane didn't answer, but her silence screamed. Rosa looked down, ashamed to continue. She spoke of clinics, places where unwanted children are tucked away. She even asked me if I knew a doctor who could make Lara seem unstable. For the first time, Nolan's knees threatened to give. Betrayal was one thing. Plotting to erase his child's future was another. His mind reeled. The image of Lara drawing rainbows in the hallway only hours before, now colliding with the thought of her trapped in some cold institution. You plan to bury my daughter alive in paperwork, he whispered, voice breaking but dangerous. To sign her away while you cashed in on the next appointment. Sloane backed against the vanity, robe slipping off one shoulder, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Nolan, listen, this was never supposed to happen. I just needed independence, my own income. I never meant... Never meant? Rosa cut her off. I saw Lara shaking in the rain. I watched her drink from the garden hose while you toasted with champagne. That was meant. The weight of the words pressed the air flat. Nolan stepped closer, towering over Sloane, but his voice dropped low, almost calm. Names, I want every name. Every man who walked into my home while my daughter was banished to the yard. Because tomorrow morning, this city will know who you really are, and so will their families. Sloane's lips quivered. If I give you names, you'll destroy me. He leaned in, whisper sharp as glass. You already destroyed yourself. I'm just here to turn on the lights. Her eyes flicked to the lockbox, to the bills scattered across the dresser. She swallowed hard. Pierce Donnelly, Grant Hollis, Gavin Sutter, Raymond Beckett, and others. I kept records, Rosa gasped, crossing herself. Nolan stared, a bitter clarity washing over him. Men who sat at his table, men who toasted at his galas, men who shook his hand and praised his empire. And all the while, they crept through his home like shadows buying silence. The doorbell rang again, this time insistent. Pounding, shaking the silence of the mansion, Nolan turned, knowing the next knock would change everything, because outside that door was someone who hadn't come to plead or to comfort, or to accuse. Someone had come to expose, and what they carried in their hands would rip the lid off the city itself. The pounding at the front door reverberated through the house like thunder chasing lightning. Nolan descended the stairs swiftly, Rosa trailing behind, with her recorder still clutched in hand. Sloane lingered at the top landing. Her robe tightened, her face pale but defiant. As if bracing for the next strike in a storm she could no longer control. When Nolan swung the heavy oak door open, rain mist blew in around the frame. Standing there, soaked but resolute, was Detective Colin Harker, a man Nolan recognized from charity galas where city officials rubbed shoulders with the elite. Off-duty, dressed in a simple windbreaker, Harker looked less like the jovial public servant and more like someone who had seen the underbelly of the city too often. "Nolan," Harker said, voice clipped, "we need to talk." His eyes flicked past Nolan into the foyer, catching sight of Rosa and the shadows upstairs. About Sloane, and about the men she entertains here. Nolan's spine stiffened. How do you know about that? Harker stepped inside, water dripping from his jacket onto the marble. He lowered his voice. Because I was assigned to watch them. Some of these men, powerful men, have been under investigation. And your wife, she's not just involved. She's their asset. She's been funneling information through pillow talk, deals, contracts, even zoning maps from your own projects. The realization struck harder than a fist. This wasn't only betrayal of marriage, it was corporate espionage, corruption, a network crawling into every corner of his empire. From the stairwell, Sloane's voice rang sharp. "Colin, stop!" Both men turned. Nolan saw it instantly, the flicker of recognition in Harker's eyes. "You know him," Nolan said slowly, piecing it together. "You've been one of them." Harker's jaw clenched, guilt flickering across his face. "Not like the others." Save it," Nolan barked. "You're here because the walls are closing in, not because of conscience." But Rosa stepped forward, pulling a photo from her folder. "Mr. Crest, look!" The image, grainy but damning, showed Harker slipping through the back gate weeks ago, uniform shirt loosened, glancing over his shoulder. Another time-stamped page listed his car's license plate, scribbled in Rosa's careful handwriting. Sloane descended 2 steps, eyes narrowing. He wasn't a client. He was protection. He warned me when raids were close. That's why the others paid so much, to feel untouchable. Because he was my shield. The house felt suddenly smaller, the chandelier above like a spotlight in a stage play. Lara, half asleep in Carmen's arms on the sofa, stirred at the voices, eyes wide. Nolan's heart clenched as her innocence brushed against the darkness spilling out around them. Protection. Nolan's voice cracked with fury. "You turned my home into a fortress for corruption. My daughter's laughter drowned out by their games. And you call it protection?" Harker raised his palms. "Listen, Nolan. This city is crawling with hypocrisy. You think Pierce Donnelly gets re-elected on clean hands? You think Judge Beckett gives rulings without debts? They would have chewed you up next. Sloane was surviving the way she knew how. By destroying a child." Nolan's tone sliced through the foyer. "By selling dignity at the price of a broken teddy bear?" Silence. Only the ticking of the grandfather clock filled the space. Rosa broke it, her voice steady. "Mr. Crest, this isn't only about family anymore. This is bigger. She has notes, recordings, lists of men. If we expose them, this city will shake." Nolan looked at Lara, her tiny frame curled on the sofa, her one-eyed teddy still clutched like a lifeline. For the first time, his empire of glass and steel seemed meaningless compared to that fragile trust. He turned back to Sloane and Harker. "Then we start tonight. The truth doesn't stay in these walls. Tomorrow, every wife, every partner, every paper in Coral Gables will know who walked through my door. You thought this mansion made you untouchable, but it's going to be your undoing." Sloane's composure fractured. Her voice trembled. "If you do this, Nolan, you won't just bury me, you'll bury half the city. Do you have any idea what they'll do to you when you drag their names through the mud?" Nolan's stare was cold as the storm outside. "Then let them come. A father who's already lost his daughter once fears nothing, and with that vow, the war lines were drawn." Upstairs, the lockbox of cash waited, full of secrets. Downstairs, a detective tangled in guilt weighed his next move. And in Nolan's arms, Lara's future pulsed fragile but alive. The house had become a courtroom. But the real trial of reputations, families, and lives was still to come, and the first gavel would fall at dawn. Dawn broke over Coral Gables with the soft gold that makes even bruised places look holy. In the kitchen, Rosa brewed cafecito the old way, mocha pot hissing like a promise, while Carmen tucked a quilt around the sleeping child on the sofa. The mansion, once a stage for betrayal, felt like a chapel before the bells. The millionaire stood at the island, phone open, voice steady. The nanny slid evidence across marble-like prayer cards. Sloane hovered near the staircase, robe tightened, eyes tracking every movement. Detective Colin Harker had shed his windbreaker and wiped rain from his jaw. He looked less like a protector now, and more like what he was, a man at the edge of a confession. "Names," Nolan said. "All of them." Sloane hesitated, then reached for a notepad. Her handwriting, elegant, expensive, curled around the truth. Pierce Donnelly, Dr. Grant Hollis, Gavin Sutter, Judge Raymond Beckett. Others followed, attorneys, hedge funders, a retired police chief who still carried weight at city dinners. She slid the list toward Nolan like a surrender flag that had taken too long to fly. Harker cleared his throat. "I can move on this with internal affairs. If you cooperate, both of you, we can cut deals, shield the girl, keep you out of the blast radius." "The blast already happened," Nolan answered, eyes on the sleeping child. "I don't want a deal. I want daylight." Rosa set 2 tiny cups on the counter. "Drink first, war later." She pushed a demitasse toward Nolan, then, after a pause, placed the second in front of Sloane. "You'll need steady hands to sign what's next," Sloane blinked. "Sign what?" "Custody transfer," Nolan said. "You don't come near Lara again. You don't text, call, or breathe in her direction." The word custody changed the air. Sloane's chin tipped up, proud even in defeat. "You think paper protects you? Paper can bury you." Something in her tone set off a current. Harker's phone buzzed on the counter. A text preview flashed. "Seabrook intake 9 a.m. Marquette confirmed. His hand shot out too late. Nolan read it anyway. "What's Seabrook?" he asked, though he already knew. Harker's jaw flexed. "A private behavioral center in Broward. Quiet, discreet money talks." Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. Carmen whispered a prayer under her breath. Nolan stared at Sloane. "You scheduled my daughter for a clinic." Sloane said nothing, but her silence nodded. Harker exhaled, the man finally stepping out of the shadows he'd shared with her. "Dr. Ivy Marquette signs kids in on parent referrals. No judge needed if the guardian consents. It's a loophole." "Guardian." Nolan's voice barely moved. "I am her father." Sloane's smile was thin as a blade. "I anticipated your absence. I have temporary guardianship paperwork, filed last week while you were in New York. Elliot handled the notarization." The name hit like a riptide. Elliot Parrish, Nolan's college friend, CFO, the man who'd toasted him on every tower opening. Family secrets didn't always run in blood. Sometimes they ran in boardrooms. "Elliot," Nolan repeated, tasting the betrayal. "He signed for you." "Elliot saw what I see," Sloane said softly. "A man married to his skyline." The notepad of names curled at the edge, the ink still wet. Rosa slid another folder forward. Emails printed, subject lines like fire alarms. "Seabrook intake packet, L. Crest, guardian consent, S. Vance." Timestamps from yesterday, Dr. Marquette's auto-signature at the bottom. The maid had collected everything while Sloane believed she was merely cleaning. Nolan's gaze moved to the child, small chest rising, Teddy's one eye staring at the chandelier as if it too had stayed awake all night. "You were going to cage her with forms. I left her once at a curb. You were going to leave her forever behind a locked door." Sloane's facade cracked. "I wanted my own life, my own money, my freedom." "Freedom isn't something you steal from a 5-year-old, Carmen said, voice trembling. "Freedom is what you give them when they're scared of thunder." Harker pocketed the buzzing phone. "We can beat the intake if we move now. Seabrook opens its doors at 8:30. If we're standing there at 8:45 with counsel and this pile," he nodded to Rosa's evidence, "they'll blink." Nolan nodded once. "Then we go," Sloane laughed, short, brittle. "You can run to Broward. Paper runs faster." She reached into her robe pocket and drew a folded form, temporary guardianship, minor, bearing a notary seal. "And guess who's on duty this morning? Beckett's cousin works intake part-time. Small world." Rosa looked to Nolan. "Miami small or Coral Gables small?" "Both," Harker said. "Tight circles, polite handshakes, quiet knives." The doorbell rang, sharp, efficient. Not the neighbor's ring, not the detective's, the kind that arrives with purpose. Nolan crossed the foyer as the sun lifted over palm fronds, turning the front glass to gold. Through it, he saw a black SUV, 2 men in neat polos, a clipboard, a neutral smile, the uniform of legal kidnapping. "Morning," the taller one said when the door opened. "We're here for a wellness transport. Seabrook Behavioral." Consent on file. Behind Nolan, the mansion pulsed with a single truth. This child had been abandoned on a curb yesterday, and now stranger hands were reaching for her again, this time with letterhead. "Consent is revoked," Nolan said, voice a wire pulled taut. "I'm the father." The man checked his clipboard. "Mr. Crest, our consent is from the guardian of record." He glanced past Nolan's shoulder at Sloane. "Miss Vance, we can proceed." Sloane didn't look at Lara. She looked at Nolan. A dare, a test, a final ruinous choice. Harker stepped forward, badge out, not the gala smile, the real one. "Detective Colin Harker, any transport today touches a potential felony investigation." "Stand down." The shorter man shifted, uncertain. "We were told this was sensitive." "It is," Harker said. "Sensitive enough that the next person who moves without a court order will spend the morning learning what obstruction means." Silence vibrated. The SUV idled, exhaust curling like a snake at the curb. Nolan felt the moment click, like the sound a safe makes before it opens. The millionaire wasn't negotiating contracts now. He was defending a heartbeat. "Rosa," he said without turning. "Wake Lara. Carmen, her shoes. Harker, you're with me." Sloane, he faced his wife, the woman who would have signed a child into disappearance. "You're going to call Seabrook and withdraw consent. Then you're going to text Dr. Ivy Marquette and say one sentence: Guardian rescinds authorization. Parent on site, and if I don't," she whispered. "Then I show your list to every wife before breakfast," Nolan replied. "And by lunch, I show it to every paper." Sloane's phone trembled in her hand. Her eyes flicked once to the SUV, once to Lara's sleeping face, once to the notepad of names whose ink was still drying. "The choice tasted like ash," she typed. The transport team checked their device. The taller one blinked. "Order cancelled." He looked almost relieved. "Apologies for the disturbance." The SUV rolled away, a black comma sliding off the page. In the sudden quiet, Rosa tied Lara's tiny sneakers while the girl fought a yawn. "Where are we going, Daddy?" she asked, voice drowsy, hopeful. Nolan lifted her, held her like a vow. "Somewhere the thunder can't reach." They moved toward the door. Child, nanny, neighbor, detective, and a father whose empire had finally found its purpose. Behind them, Sloane stood in the foyer, robe limp, phone still in her hand. The family secrets she'd curated, turning to smoke in the morning light. But as the group reached the driveway, Harker's phone vibrated again. An unknown number, a new text. "A sharper threat. Check your back gate. You're not the only one who can ring doorbells." E.P. Nolan turned toward the pool courtyard, just as a second SUV eased against the hedge. The back way, the way friends use when they don't want to be seen, and the man stepping out wasn't a stranger at all. The back gate creaked open, hinges groaning against the humid Florida air. Nolan's pulse surged as he recognized the man stepping out of the SUV, broad-shouldered suit jacket draped over one arm, confidence worn like cologne. Elliot Parrish, CFO of Crest Developments, Nolan's college roommate, the best man at his wedding. The man who had toasted every deal, who had sworn loyalty over bourbon and contracts. Now he stood in the sunlight of betrayal. His tie loosened, eyes shifting not with guilt, but calculation. "Morning, Nolan," Elliot said, as if they were meeting for golf. "We need to talk. Before you make mistakes you can't undo." Rosa stepped closer, protective, one hand on Lara's back. Harker, still clutching his buzzing phone, muttered low, "That's the notary. The signature that made Sloane's guardianship legal." Nolan's jaw tightened. "Elliot, you signed away my daughter." Elliot exhaled, shoulders rising. "I signed papers to protect your empire." "Don't twist it." "You're spread thin, Nolan, always flying, always trusting the wrong people." "I kept things orderly, efficient." "Efficient?" Nolan's voice rose. "Efficient is balancing books. Efficient is shaving costs. Efficient isn't conspiring to disappear my child." Lara clutched her teddy tighter, whispering, "Daddy, who is he?" Nolan swallowed hard. "He used to be my friend." Elliot's smirk faltered. "Still am. I'm the only one who told Sloane the truth. You weren't going to slow down. You weren't going to stay. So she planned her own future, and I..." Well, I made sure she didn't sink us both. Call it risk management, Rosa's voice cracked like thunder. You call selling out a child management? Dios mío, this house is cursed with people who speak numbers and forget souls. Carmen crossed herself, whispering a prayer in Spanish, her eyes fixed on Lara's trembling shoulders. Harker stepped forward, badge glinting in the rising sun. Mr. Parrish, you falsified guardianship documents. That's fraud at best, conspiracy at worst, Elliot chuckled darkly. Don't pull that card with me, detective. You think your name isn't on Rosa's list? I've seen the notes. You've been through that gate too. The words cut the air like glass. Nolan turned sharply to Harker. Is that true? Harker's jaw set, guilt flickering. I was embedded, watching the others. Slipped once. But I didn't. You slipped, Nolan spat. And in your slip, my daughter slept under a tree during a storm. The silence was brutal. Even the birds seemed to pause in the banyan branches overhead. Elliot seized the moment, voice oily. Nolan, you can't burn this down. Don't you see? If you expose them, you expose yourself. Every headline will read, Millionaire's mansion turned into brothel. Doesn't matter who's guilty, they'll hang it on you. On your name. Lara will grow up with her father branded as the man who couldn't keep his own house clean. Nolan's chest heaved. For years he had lived for that name. Crest, the skyline etched in glass and steel. Now it was mud, dragged through rain and secrets. But then Lara tugged at his sleeve, her little voice trembling but clear. Daddy, I don't care about the name. I just want to be safe with you. The words cut deeper than any betrayal. The empire could collapse, the papers could scream, but her trust was the only currency that mattered. Nolan's voice steadied, quiet but resolute. You're right, Elliot. My house wasn't clean, but I'm cleaning it now. He turned to Harker. Arrest him, Elliot laughed, spreading his arms. On what charge? Protecting my friend's legacy. Good luck making that stick. Rosa stepped forward, thrusting her spiral notebook into Harker's chest. It sticks. Dates, signatures, photos. His car, his plate, his name on the guardianship file. It sticks like rain on Miami pavement. For the first time, Elliot's confidence cracked. His smirk slid, replaced by a twitch of fear. He looked to Sloane, still standing pale in the foyer, robe limp, her phone clutched like a drowning woman holds driftwood. You dragged me into this, Elliot snapped. You said he'd never know. You said the papers would hold. Sloane's voice rose shrill. And you said the money would hide us. The argument spiraled, voices colliding like thunder and lightning. Lara buried her face in Nolan's chest, trembling. He pressed his lips to her hair, whispering, Not here, not anymore. The storm inside had found its eye. Nolan knew what had to come next. He couldn't just throw them out. He couldn't just call lawyers. He would have to drag this into the light of day, in front of every family, every judge, every voter, and the first step would be tearing open the city's mask at the very place where its reputation lived and died. The courthouse. As the sun climbed higher, Nolan held his daughter in one arm and the evidence in the other. The millionaire who once built towers was about to bring them down, but what he didn't yet know was that Lara herself carried the final key, something she had seen, something she had overheard, a secret even Rosa hadn't written down, and when that secret came out, it wouldn't just destroy reputations. It would burn bridges of blood. By mid-morning, Biscayne Bay glittered like nothing ugly had ever happened beneath its sun. But on the courthouse steps in downtown Miami, ugliness met daylight. The millionaire stood there, Nolan Crest, one arm cinched around the child, the other gripping a slim leather folio that held a city's shame. At his side, Rosa Delgado, the steadfast nanny maid with hurricane-proof courage, Detective Colin Harker, jaw tight, wrestling his own failures, and Carmen Reyes, neighbor-turned-guardian angel with sandwiches and prayers. A knot of wives and partners gathered, summoned not by gossip, but by Nolan's blunt calls at dawn, "You deserve the truth." There was Laura Donnelly, eyes rimmed red, Inez Hollis, spine straight despite trembling hands, Sylvia Sutter, birthday pearls swapped for resolve. And Margarita Beckett, the judge's wife, a woman who believed in vows and Sunday suppers. Nolan didn't make speeches. He handed each woman a packet: dates, transfers, license plates, doorbell timestamps, balcony camera stills no one realized were saving time in the background. He let the paper speak first, because for too long paper had been used to cage a child. Now it would unmask men. Laura's voice broke the morning. Every Thursday, Pemberley Values Pierce was busy with policies. She laughed, a sound neither wit nor joy. Policies, my foot. Inez scanned figures, lips moving. 2 sessions a week, 10 months. Grant told me the budget was tight. She held the page like something radioactive. Tuition money gone. To a woman hired to be a secret, not a wife. Sylvia stared at the transfers, then at the quiet camera dot mounted over the Crest Mansion portico. 5,000 for privacy. Do you know what it costs me now to walk into my own kitchen? Her laugh came out a sob. Everything. And then Margarita Beckett pressed her palm over her crucifix and whispered, "Not Raymond." The packet trembled in her hands. "Please, God, not my husband." Rosa stood like a lighthouse. "Senoras, I recorded for the child, not for revenge. But truth is, a first aid kit when lies have cut too deep." Harker lifted his badge, the official seal catching the light. "Internal Affairs will seize devices by noon. If any man thinks he's untouchable, he can enjoy the view from the interview room first." The courthouse doors whooshed open. Sloane Vance arrived, flanked by a lawyer in beige linen, and Elliot Parrish, composed in banker blue. Sloane had traded her robe for armor, ivory sheath dress, sunglasses, a controlled smile that begged the cameras to adore and forget. "Ladies," her lawyer said smoothly, "let's not trial this in the press." Laura lowered her pages, voice steel. "Let's trial it where my daughter can read the verdict someday." Sloane's lips curved, pitying. "You're all emotional. Nolan is staging a spectacle to distract from his negligence. He was never home. He left a child to staff and schedules. Staff made sure the child ate," Carmen snapped. "You made sure the rain did." Something shifted in the crowd. Faces hardened. Bystanders slowed. Everyone recognized the feeling. A city about to molt. Nolan didn't move toward Sloane. He knelt to Lara's level. "Do you want to stand with Rosa, sweetheart?" Lara nodded, hand finding the nanny's fingers. "With Miss Rosa, I'm not scared." Harker glanced at Nolan's folio. "You ready?" Nolan opened it, pulled one last recording Rosa had tucked in, tagged bedroom door, filtered. He pressed play. The audio was knife clean, Sloane's voice silken and cold, cataloging prices, schedules, and then a different tone, deferential, almost childlike. "Dad, you promised if the clinic pushed back you'd smooth the papers. You said guardianship was just a signature." Silence poured across the steps like oil. A gull cried somewhere stupidly bright against the hush. Margarita Beckett swayed. "Dad?" Harker's head snapped up. "Run that back." He did. The line cut again, unmistakable. "Dad, not Judge, not Your Honor, Dad." Every eye found Judge Raymond Beckett's framed official portrait inside the courthouse lobby through the glass. The man who lectured graduates about integrity. The man whose Sunday grace preceded roast chicken and cobbler. The man whose family secrets had just spilled into the street like broken champagne. Margarita's hand fell from her crucifix. The crucifix fell after it, clinking against marble. Sloane's lawyer stepped forward, sputtering. "Context," Rosa raised a palm. "Context is the room a lie builds for itself." Sloane lifted her chin. "Yes, he's my father. Now you understand leverage. Girls raised in small houses learn the rules quick. Men with power make problems disappear. They built a life where men paid to pretend, and another where men paid to erase. Don't hate the student. Hate the syllabus." Laura's voice went razor thin. "We're mothers. We don't hate syllabi. We hate betrayal." Harker dialed fast. "Chief, we've got a conflict. Judge Beckett is entangled. We need a state prosecutor, special unit." Inside the glass, clerks scattered like startled birds. Someone tugged down the judge's portrait as if it burned to touch. Outside, reporters gathered like rain clouds, microphones in bloom. Elliot leaned toward Nolan, whisper venom. "You've just nuked your own foundation. Every deal, every permit, every ribbon cutting you've done with Beckett within a mile of it, tainted. Nolan didn't blink. Then let it be tainted. Towers can be rebuilt. Children don't get to be 5 twice. The line hit the wives first. Inez's fingers loosened from their death grip. Silva exhaled wrong years. Laura reached for Margarita's hand, woman to woman, not rival to rival. Margarita didn't pull away. She clutched back like a drowning person clutches breath. "Señora," Rosa whispered to Margarita, voice warm as café con leche. "Come with us. Sit with Laura and Inez. You don't have to face this alone." Margarita nodded once, the approval of a queen deposing a king. Sloane's lawyer tried one last thread. "We will paint this for what it is. A millionaire with buyer's remorse, a nanny who overstepped, a jealous neighbor, a detective covering his—" Harker stepped into the mic cluster, voice even. "I'm under review as of now. You'll get my badge if that's what justice needs. But first, these women get their day. And this child gets a morning with no transports and no threats." The crowd's temperature changed, cooler, clearer. Cameras recorded, but the weight in the air wasn't spectacle. It was redemption beginning its slow, stubborn climb. Nolan looked down. Lara was drawing in the margin of Rosa's notebook, 2 stick figures holding hands under a fat Florida cloud. He swallowed hard. "Rosa, after this, help me plant a garden at home?" Right where she waited. "See," Rosa said, smiling like a sunrise. "We'll plant marigolds. They keep the bad bugs away." Sloane's sunglasses hid nothing now. She stood briefly unmoored, daughter, wife, architect of her own fall. "You think flowers fix what's broken?" she asked almost to herself. "No," Nolan said quietly. "But they announce what we're growing next." A siren's whoop split the air, short, procedural. 2 unmarked cars slid to the curb. State investigators stepped out, jackets flashing insignia that meant the courthouse was no longer a safe room for the powerful. Inside, a clerk unlocked a side door to a conference suite. Outside, the wives gripped packets like shields. Harker turned to Nolan. "This is the part where we walk in, and they try to make it quiet." Nolan adjusted Lara on his hip. "Then we will make it loud." Rosa squeezed his arm. Carmen pressed a rosary into Margarita's palm. The steps felt less like marble now, more like a bridge. But just as they moved, Lara tugged Rosa's sleeve, eyes wide with a memory surfacing from the fog, where kids store the things adults hope they'll forget. "Miss Rosa," she whispered, "I heard Aunt Sloane one night." She told Grandpa Ray something else. "About Mr. Elliot." She said, "Don't worry, Dad. If Nolan finds out the checks, we'll say Elliot was just moving money. We'll say the accounts were for L. Crest. That's my name, right? L for Lara." Rosa's breath caught. Harker's pen hovered. Elliot went very still. Nolan turned slowly to his CFO, the man who kept the books, the man who notarized guardianship nightmares. "Explain," he said, voice as level as a plumb line. Elliot's smile returned, brittle as spun sugar. "Shells, trusts, tuition vehicles, labels, Nolan, numbers rearrange. Headlines don't have to." The bay breeze lifted the edge of Lara's drawing. On it, a stick figure with a crown stood between 2 smaller figures. Underneath, in a child's deliberate letters, it read, "Daddy plus me." Harker clicked his pen shut. "Inside," he said. "Now, because the next revelation wouldn't only be about beds and doorbells. It would be about ledgers and lifelines. About whether the money that built the skyline had also bought the silence that nearly swallowed a child, and somewhere between the portrait hooks and the microphones, a dynasty was about to lose its last name. The conference room smelled of lemon polish and old secrets. Blinds half drawn, microphones perched like vultures, and a half circle of wives sitting shoulder to shoulder, Laura, Inez, Sylvia, and Margarita, each gripping their packet of shame. At the far end, state investigators spread folders across mahogany, their pens scratching like chisels on tombstones. Nolan stood with Rosa and Carmen behind him. Lara balanced on his hip, drawing tiny suns in Rosa's notebook. Across the table, Sloane sat stiff, lawyer whispering in her ear. Elliot Parrish adjusted his cufflinks. That same oily confidence, though a bead of sweat had begun to crawl down his temple. "Mr. Parrish," one investigator said, laying down a printout. These transfers, labeled L Crest Trust, route through 3 offshore accounts and return here in your handwriting. Explain. Elliot smiled thinly. It's standard tax structuring. L stands for legacy. Nolan's legacy. Estate planning. Estate planning doesn't usually include 5-figure withdrawals during overseas trips, the investigator replied. Nor do they vanish the week a child is documented sleeping in a yard. Rosa's voice rose clear as church bells. Because those withdrawals didn't feed Lara, they fed Sloane's clients. They bought silence, bought champagne, bought time. Sloane hissed, "Careful, Rosa," but Nolan's eyes locked on Elliot. "You let me shake your hand every Monday morning." "You knew my daughter was starving while you signed checks to hide it." Elliot leaned forward, voice low. "I kept your name out of headlines. You think these women would have believed Rosa without my filters? I was the firewall, Nolan. Without me, you'd already be ruined." Lara's small voice cut the air. "Daddy, what's a firewall?" Nolan kissed her hair. "Something that pretends to protect, but burns you from behind." The wives shifted. Inez slammed her package shut. "We're done hearing excuses. Men hid their sins behind this mansion, this friendship, this courtroom. And all of us paid." Laura nodded, voice trembling. "We paid with college funds, with faith, with years of loyalty. I won't sit in another room where men barter our lives with paperwork." Margarita rose, surprising everyone with her frail frame's steadiness. "I prayed for my husband every night, and all the while his daughter was here, this woman beside him, collecting dues. My rosary broke on the steps outside, but maybe God wanted my hands free to point at truth." She pointed directly at Elliot. "You twisted Nolan's name into a shield. That shield is broken." The lead investigator tapped his pen. "Mr. Parrish, we're opening charges. Conspiracy to commit fraud, accessory to child endangerment, obstruction." Elliot chuckled, a sound like glass cracking. "Charge me then. But understand, if I fall, Nolan falls. Crest Developments collapses, every high-rise, every contract. Do you want to bankrupt half the city? Or do you want to look the other way, like you always do?" The tension was thick as storm clouds. Carmen whispered a prayer under her breath. Rosa tightened her grip on the notebook, and then Lara spoke again, softly but with piercing clarity. "Daddy, tell them about the night Sloane called Grandpa. About my name on the papers." The room stilled. Nolan turned to his daughter, eyes wide. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Lara's brows furrowed as she remembered. "I was in the hallway. Sloane said, don't worry, Dad, Elliot already moved the money. If Nolan asks, we'll say it's for Lara's college." She said my name like I was a reason for secrets. The investigator's pen froze mid-stroke. He looked at Elliot. "So not legacy, not estate planning. You falsified documents using a minor's identity." Color drained from Elliot's face. "She's 5 years old. She doesn't understand. She understands enough to know when her belly's empty," Rosa cut in. "She understands what betrayal tastes like. Don't you dare call her confused." Sloane slammed her palm on the table. "Stop this circus. You think destroying us builds Nolan up? He left that child. He abandoned her to my care. If I failed, it was because he failed first." Nolan's voice was low, steady, dangerous. "I left on business. I left to provide. But I never left my love. And love doesn't sign away children. Love doesn't lock them outside while men drink upstairs. Love doesn't put a 5-year-old's name on blood money." Sylvia's hand shot into the air like judgment itself. "Then let it be recorded. Our husbands aren't the only ones guilty. This woman and this man conspired with them. Let Miami see all the rot, so something new can grow." Reporters outside caught the echo of her words through the glass, scribbling feverishly. Cameras clicked. The courthouse was no longer a fortress. It was a lantern. The investigator closed his folder with finality. "We'll pursue indictments. Judge Beckett's role complicates things, but no one is above inquiry. Mr. Parrish, Miss Vance, prepare yourselves." Elliot slumped back, pale. Sloane adjusted her sunglasses with trembling fingers. Nolan gathered Lara into his arms. She pressed the teddy bear against his chest and whispered, "Daddy, do we go home now?" He looked around at the wreckage of alliances, at Rosa's steadfast eyes, at Carmen's whispered prayers, at the wives who had found voices sharper than steel. "Not yet, sweetheart," he murmured. "First we finish here. Then we plant flowers where secrets once grew. But as the investigators began collecting evidence, a bailiff rushed in, breathless. "There's been a breach," he announced. "Someone's leaked the recordings already. The press is playing them live." Gasps filled the room. Sloane's head snapped toward the door, panic unraveling her mask. Elliot cursed under his breath. Nolan tightened his hold on Lara. For once, fear didn't touch him. Because truth at last was louder than any lie, and with the city listening, the final judgment was about to begin. The courthouse erupted like a hive kicked open. Reporters swarmed the marble steps, cameras flashing as snippets of Rosa's recordings blasted from radios and phones. Voices overlapped, Sloane's negotiations, Elliot's smug reassurances, Judge Beckett's whispered complicity. Miami wasn't just listening. Miami was boiling. Inside the chamber, Nolan Crest held Lara close, her small arms locked around his neck. Rosa stood to his left, a quiet sentinel, while Carmen whispered prayers to steady the women whose worlds had shattered. The wives, Laura, Inez, Sylvia, and Margarita, had moved from grief into resolve, their faces steel masks of defiance. They weren't just victims anymore. They were a jury writing its own verdict. Sloane sat pale, her ivory sheath dress now wrinkled, sunglasses abandoned on the table. Elliot's composure had cracked entirely. Sweat beaded his forehead, his tie yanked loose. The veneer of power had fallen away, leaving two conspirators blinking under the harsh noon light of consequence. The lead investigator closed his binder. "The tapes are public. There's no containing this. Arrests are imminent. Charges include fraud, conspiracy, child endangerment, and obstruction. And if Judge Beckett attempts interference, the state will escalate to federal jurisdiction." Sloane's voice trembled. You can't destroy all of us. Nolan, please, if you love me." Nolan turned to her, voice steady as a blade. "On love? You turned it into a transaction. You called my daughter collateral. That word killed anything we might have had." Lara's tiny voice, innocent but piercing, broke the silence. "Daddy, will Aunt Sloane go away now?" "Yes, sweetheart," Nolan said, brushing her tangled hair back gently. "She'll go away, and she'll never hurt you again." The deputies moved forward, handcuffs gleaming under fluorescent lights. Elliot rose abruptly, his chair screeching. "You'll regret this, Nolan. Without me, your empire collapses. They'll strip your name from every tower." Nolan adjusted Lara on his hip. "Then let them. Towers can be rebuilt. A child's soul cannot." The cuffs clicked shut. Sloane's sobs echoed down the corridor as she was led away, Elliot shouting curses that bounced hollow off stone walls. For the first time, the Crest Mansion's walls no longer held the only secrets. Now, the whole city bore witness. That night, Nolan returned home. The mansion felt different, stripped of perfume and lies. Rosa and Carmen prepared a meal, simple arroz con pollo and warm rolls, but to Lara it was a feast. She sat at the dining table, swinging her legs, smiling as she devoured her plate. "Daddy," she asked between bites, "can we plant flowers tomorrow?" "By the big tree?" "Yes," Nolan whispered, eyes misting. "We'll plant marigolds, roses, whatever you want. That yard will never be your prison again. It will be your garden." Rosa placed a hand on his shoulder. "You fought for her, Mr. Crest. That's what fathers are meant to do." For the first time in years, Nolan felt lighter. Not because the city would forgive him, but because the little girl with the one-eyed teddy had chosen to trust him again. Weeks later, newspapers screamed of resignations, divorces, and scandals. Councilman Donnelly stepped down in disgrace. Dr. Hollis's license was revoked. Gabriel Sutter's hotels emptied as guests fled. Judge Beckett, cornered by his own daughter's recordings, was forced into early retirement. Miami's skyline trembled, but beneath it families reclaimed voices long buried, and in Coral Gables, the Crest Mansion was transformed. The guest rooms filled with color, Lara's laughter echoing through freshly painted halls. Rosa returned officially as housekeeper, but to Lara she was more, a protector, a second mother. Carmen became a frequent visitor, her sandwiches now symbolic of survival shared. One Saturday morning, Nolan and Lara knelt together under the banyan tree, where she once shivered through storms. Her small fingers pressed marigold roots into the soil. "These flowers will grow big, Daddy," she said solemnly. "Yes," Nolan replied, voice thick. "Because now they grow in love, not in fear." Lara smiled, dirt smudging her cheek. "And now this house is ours." "Just ours." Nolan pulled her close, tears streaking his face, but they were tears of release, not regret. In her eyes he saw redemption, not just his own, but for a city scarred by secrets. "I'm John Parker, and remember, every story hides a truth that betrayal cannot bury innocence forever, a truth that even the wealthiest towers crumble when built on lies. And above all, a truth that a father's love, fierce and unyielding, can turn the coldest mansion into a home again." Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give your like. It's very important to me. And please leave in the comments which city or country you are listening to me from. Your words help these stories travel farther, touching hearts just like yours. Because in the end, redemption is never just one man's fight. It's a garden we plant together,